We will be recording this call and sharing it with people after the call. And equally too, there's various papers that some of the panel have prepared, various outputs from recent experience that they're very comfortable in sharing. So again, I'll share that with everybody on the call, and indeed a number of people who can't make this morning's call. If you have any additional questions beyond the ones that have been submitted, if you could basically use the chat box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll do our very best to come to them if we can. In reality, we've got far too many questions for 1 hour. But I'd like to start now, and a very quick summary, I think, of where we are at the moment. And sorry to sound so negative, honestly, on a sort of Tuesday or even indeed on a Wednesday, but the grim daily total of number of COVID deaths will now, as you're probably aware, include deaths that occur in care homes as well as hospitals. And the jump is therefore inevitable today. Given this scenario, and given the fact that a third of all corona fatalities are happening in care homes, we're likely to see a significant increase today on the number of people who've been declared having died from COVID in this period. And in fact, the FT this morning reported on data from the Office of Statistics that suggested that nearer to 46,000 people, that's 46,000 people, have died from COVID or COVID-related problems in the last 7 weeks. And obviously that is a significant jump from the figures that the government have been using thus far, and would put us amongst the largest in the world, just behind North America. A statistic, obviously, that we don't want to be anywhere near the second largest in the world. Behind these headlines is what experts refer to as a parallel epidemic, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this, and that's the wider implications and the impact on public health, including late or misdiagnosis of everything from cancer to appendicitis. Beyond, obviously, the health impact, we're now obviously beginning to take into account and seeing the impact on the commercial realities and the economy more widely. Many of you would have seen this morning British Airways, in fact last night, announced that they're looking to cut up to 12,000 jobs. And a report from the FT today suggests that the economy will have shrunk by around a third in March and in April. Now, what does this mean for all of us? Well, many of you have already had to adapt to the new environment, reducing your cost base, furloughing staff, applying in some cases, and receiving loans from the government. Others of you also have yet to take these actions. It's likely that as things develop over the next month or so, and with a likely extension to the current lockdown, that all businesses of all sizes, small, large, or in the case of British Airways, global, are going to have their own problems. And it's also likely that a deep and long recession will follow this terrible crisis. So, sorry, as I said, to see the burden of bad news, but I think that is the reality that we're all facing today. And for that reason, I thought it was a good time to get together a panel of experts to get an update, really, on what's happening from both the legal, financial, commercial, and HR world. And we put together an illustrious panel of 13 today from Clarion, a leading legal firm with unrivaled experience in the media and marketing space. We're joined by Jonathan Sims, partner for corporate, Fiona Marr, legal director for commercial, and Chris Booth, partner for employment. Thank you for joining us. We have Nick Harvey, who's a partner at Escalate Disputes. Escalate is a groundbreaking multi-award winning commercial dispute service that's helping to transform how SMEs resolve disputes, bad debts, and late payments. Reality HR is a fully outsourced CIPD qualified HR consultancy, and they deliver HR support and advice for media and marketing businesses across the UK. We're joined by Catherine Hathaway and Nicola Gator, two of Reality HR's senior consultants. We have the very well known Julian Davis, founder and partner of Redfin, a chartered accountant and accountancy firm, leading providers of accountancy, finance and business growth consulting to the creative media and technology industries with us today. And Redfin, I think, are very well known, in fact, are used by a number of our members. We have Clive Mission and Graham Kemp, joint directors of the MAAG. As you know, Pimento have been partnering with the MAAG throughout this crisis. And God bless them, the MAAG have actually taken a number of initiatives, launched a number of programs to help people at this time. Their latest is in support of furloughed staff entitled Independence FC, and furloughed staff have, in a number of cases, been cut off by their agencies, email addresses removed and left without any contact. And they've stepped into this gap and are helping people from all sorts of agencies and consultancies. Where are you, sir? Is founder and managing partner of MA Advisory, which initiates and manages M&A transactions. And obviously, as the crisis develops, agencies are seeking opportunities to acquire as well as be acquired, and therefore quite interested to know the implications of that, and looking forward to getting some insights from him. And Barry Dudley, partner, friend, and in the same similar space, shall we say, to David, from Green Square. Green Square are expert corporate finance advisors, and in fact, they actually work very closely with our M&A Advisory. And Green Square provides corporate finance advice to shareholders of independent media marketing communications agencies. And Barry himself has spent 20 odd years within the marketing sector, including 9 years as Group CEO of Naked Communications. Paul Woolley is founder, partner, and chair of BAAA. I was thinking this morning, Paul, in light of British Airways, you might need to reconsider your name of your company there, but a boutique consultancy partnering with entrepreneurial leaders of marketing and communications agencies. Paul's been incredibly supportive to a number of Pimento members during the crisis, reaching out and helping them, in particular with accessing government-backed loans and more broadly giving advice across a number of different spheres drawn from his agency world. And then finally, Russell White, founder and partner of Premier Consultants, a specialist marketing recruitment firm that's been in business for over 20 years. Russell has seen the impact of a number of recessions on people, but unlike previous downturns, the impact on people may be more permanent this time around as we enter the new normal. So, as I say, just reading the talent we've got in front of us, I do hope you take every opportunity to engage with them today. And we'll start with the first question, which is one for Mr. Julian Davis, sir. Just find you on the screen.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
So this one is the question first is the government's announced a new loan scheme for micro businesses. What are the qualifications and how do I go about applying for these, please?
Okay, thank you, Stephen. In the very somber news from Stephen just then, this is a little glimmer of good news. The government have announced what they call the bounce back loan, and they've suggested it's a very simple and quick way to borrow between £2,000 and £50,000. It's being launched 9 o'clock next Monday morning on the 4th of May. And you'll be able to apply through most of the high street banks. They're going to announce which ones are included. But you'll have a sort of 2-page online form that we're told includes no eligibility criteria and no requirement for showing that the business will be viable in the future. That's unlike the existing loans. So, and ambitiously, they said that once you completed the form, the money will be available in your account within 24 hours. Now we'll wait and see whether that actually happens or not. But what's also really good is you don't actually have to pay anything back for 12 months. So you've got potentially £50,000 for 12 months, and there are no charges either. So that's good news. But although it's going to be very useful for businesses, you do have to pay it back. It isn't free money. So in 12 months' time, you will have to start paying it back. So it's great in the short term, but it may come home to roost in the future. As soon as we have any more details, we'll let you know. But on the face of it, it seems quite promising.
And are you able to go for that particular loan if you've already applied for one of the CBILS?
They haven't specified that yet, but I wouldn't have thought it would stop you, but I'm not 100% sure. Let's wait and see.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Turning our attention to people for a second, I've got a question here for Catherine and about Reality HR. Either of you, as the economic impact worsens, is there any likelihood that the government would extend the furloughing period?
Thank you, Stephen. I'll answer that one. We've seen that the furlough scheme has been really quite useful and valuable for a number of businesses across the UK economy who were significantly and often immediately impacted with a downturn in work as this coronavirus crisis hit. So it's been great for avoiding those immediate redundancies, but obviously huge numbers have been invested in this by the government, and one of the key factors going forward is how long can the government continue to fund this scheme. I think as they start to make decisions about lockdown and what the coming weeks will bring for us, they'll be making decisions about how and if they can continue this scheme. The current scheme is due to end on the 30th of June. So given the 3-week minimum period for any furlough, the latest somebody could be furloughed would be the 10th of June. So people need to be making quite quick decisions about that. I think the scheme will be extended, but perhaps not in the same form that it is now. And hopefully we'll start to see some details from the government about that in the next week or so. I think it may look different for different sectors. So if you consider hospitality and restaurants may be impacted for much, much longer than some of the other sectors, they may be offered more support through the furlough scheme for a longer period. We may see a gradual scaling down in the amount that the government funds. So whilst it's currently 80% of people's salaries capped at £2,500 a month, we may see as we go into July, August, September that this is reduced to perhaps supporting companies with just 60% or 40%. So I think there will be an extension of the scheme, but it might not look quite as it does now.
Thank you. What's the situation for company directors?
Okay, so I'll take that one, Stephen. So the simple answer is that yes, salaried company directors can be furloughed, the same as any other employee. They ideally, board approval should be received for that in respect of company directors. And they can carry out some reasonable statutory duties. I'm sure most of you are aware that any employee on a furlough scheme shouldn't carry out any work for the company during the period of time that they're on furlough. And that's the same for company directors, but any statutory duties that they've got, they can continue as long as they're reasonable and they're not generating any revenue for the company, then they can carry out those duties. And yes, they can be salaried, they can be furloughed in the same way as any other employee and receive up to the £2,500 or 80% of salary, which of course can be topped up by the company if they wish to do so.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We'll stay with furloughing for a second, if I may. This is one directed really at you, Clive, because obviously I know you're doing a lot of work in this space at the moment. And the one question I have for you, which is semi-legal, but actually more sort of a practical nature, is there a right that the firm cuts off somebody from their email? Should they be doing that? And what are you doing basically to be able to assist people who have perhaps been cut off from their agency and left very much to their own devices?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. The being cut off from the email was very much a step that companies took in the very early days. We sought clarity through Moore-Kingston Smith, and their advice was you don't actually have to cut people off from their email. What companies need to do is to take absolute provision to be able to demonstrate, should there be an inquiry, and they think that there will be some auditing going on after all of this into these companies, to show that the people were effectively not working for the business during the period of furlough. And some of that is in the paperwork to making that absolutely clear, and other steps being taken. So actually cutting off from email is not a mandatory thing. And I believe that some companies are actually now starting to put some of the reconnect some of those people, providing they've taken some of the steps to be able to cover any kind of audit to show that the people were actually cut off. That's making life marginally easier to track some of these people down.
Thank you. Quick question, still relating to the furlough, and probably one for either Reality HR or Clarion here. Can I refurlough a member of staff once I get them off the scheme if the work that doesn't come through as I expected So this is where people have furloughed people actually hope that they've got a piece of business, but it actually hasn't followed through to actually.
Well, it's Chris here. I mean, if you need to request somebody to come back from furlough, depending on your business need, ideally you wouldn't want to be doing that if they had only been away for less than 3 weeks, because then they would disqualify from being able to under the scheme. But if you have a business need to get them back, then you may have to make that judgment. Ideally, if somebody has come back after a 3-week period, you can, even if they're for a day or even less than that, you can re-furlough them in the same way that you had done on the first time round.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And I think probably one final question on relating to furloughing, I may, again, Chris, it's for you. Is I've already furloughed as many staff as I can. As cash flow gets worse, I'm looking seriously at making staff redundant in the circumstances. Is there any relief from redundancy payments that I'd be due?
At this point, there's no relief at all in relation to what you would be obliged to pay somebody by reason of a statutory redundancy payment if they had the 2-year qualifying period to receive that payment. And more specifically, redundancy law in terms of process hasn't changed in any way. So you'd still have to justify, this is what British Airways will have to be doing, you'll still have to justify your decision to go into a redundancy program when the furlough scheme is still up and running and still may be applicable to many staff. So you'd have to justify the decision to go into a redundancy consultation process and justify the redundancy if that's the decision and implementation you ultimately make. And one thing you need to remember in that is that the totality of the staff need to be considered as one, not just, there's no separation between those who are furloughed and those who may still be working for you on a full-time basis or reduced hours basis.
Okay, well, that's going to be interesting as things develop the next few weeks. I've got one here for...
Sorry, can I just add one point just on terms of the furloughing? Because I'm just in conversations with BEIS BAYS on one of the points, that people that are furloughed, if they have EMI share options, it could actually negate those. There are two things that have come through some of the government measures which are unintended consequences. One relating to companies that have taken CBIL loans could be against the EIS if shares have been issued under EIS, and the other one under furloughing, EMI share options to that employee if they are furloughed might also be void as well. There are some complexities. BAYS got back to me yesterday, which they are looking into, but these are two unintended consequences that I thought I might want to share with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of our members that have got similar schemes in their businesses, so that's very interesting there, Clive. Thank you. One for you, mate, Julian. It's my landlord hasn't responded to my request to suspend rent payments on our offices, so we decided to withdraw payment. What is our legal position, and how can we claim any relief if there is any from government schemes? Am I wrong in directing that one at you, Julian?
Sorry, I didn't realise you directed at me. I wouldn't know the legal position. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
In which case, if there's any kind of relief that's available. So I know there was talk of relief, but it wasn't enforced. My landlord hasn't responded to my request to suspend rent payments on our offices, so we've decided to withdraw payment. What is our legal position, and how can we claim any relief if there is any from government schemes?
Okay, I think, well, legally you owe the money. I don't think they're allowed to evict you during this period, but legally they could start proceedings against you to recover it. There's no government relief for rent at this point, only rates for smaller businesses.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to move on to a popular series of questions that we've had from people relating to debt recovery, and I'm going to address these to our friends at Escalate, who I say are professionals in this space. So Nick Harvey is going to be answering these questions. Nick, we've just received a winding up order, not me personally, from a supplier, but we aren't in a position to pay any debt just now. Are the debts active, or can we ride this one out for a while? So this is more of a sort of timing question, and whether people are able to sort of play the game, if you like, a little. So that one's direct. Nick Harvey.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the current environment is being set up where there's that competing interest between the those pre-COVID-19 indebtedness and those companies that have hit the skids, as it were, as a result of COVID-19. And the government and the courts have got that, really wrestling with that competing interest between those two. So you've got a winding up petition. Certainly the platform is there. There are sort of insolvency changes to the insolvency rules that are imminent, which are effectively going to create a moratorium on the presentation of winding up petitions, and also to create a comfort blanket around businesses. So the platform will be there for businesses to kick the can down the road and delay things, but the challenge will be upon the lawyers to earn their crust, as it were, and demonstrate to the courts that in the particular instance where you're trying to enforce, that this was, as I say, a pre-COVID-19 already pre-existing debtors that couldn't pay their debts when they fell due situation, as opposed to one where the debt had arisen as a result of the sort of the whole mess that everybody's in at the moment, and that'll be the position.
Okay, so existing debt prior to COVID basically will be treated different potentially to debt that occurs in this period. But either way, firms technically, whilst they may be insolvent or likely to go into insolvency, have that relief at the moment, and they can continue to trade for this until such time as we come out of this period.
Well, if a winding up order is made, then no, that they won't be able to trade. But certainly there will be a comfort blanket will be given to companies to try and sort their affairs out and work through. So give them time to arrange arrangements with informal arrangements with creditors, or do CVAs and work their way through, and either come to an orderly winding up or come out the other side. So certainly the courts will be looking to try and give forbearance and tolerance to those businesses. But as I say, the challenge for the lawyers will be where there is pre-existing indebtedness pre-COVID-19, that's and that, as I say, was a pre-existing problem, then the challenge will be there to demonstrate that to the court, in which case the court should not be giving tolerance in those circumstances.
Okay, and related to that, I mean, the courts are still active, are they? They're still open for business?
The courts are still open for business. There is a triage in place in terms of urgency and so on, but certainly the courts are open for business. They administratively may be a bit slower, so there will be delays, inevitable delays, but they are open for business, yes. Okay. And they're doing remote hearings. Even the Court of Appeal are doing remote hearings on Zoom and so on.
Stick with him for a moment, if I may, because two related questions. One is, clients slow down payments and we're finding it really difficult to get a return on our calls and emails, with many claiming to be out of office. What can we do in this situation to get a response? Okay, well,
I mean, undoubtedly the current circumstances are going to create a more challenging environment, and as I said before, sort of it is that platform for debtors to exploit and kick the can down the road. I think the key message is for members, so don't give up, mustn't give up. Now actually is the time to get their houses in order and to improve the cash flow. So calling at different times, calling different numbers, using all the contact points that you've got there. Don't forget that whilst there might be out of office activated messages, that doesn't mean the message isn't necessarily getting through. So don't give up on that. There are process servers that are out there that will still go and do sort of personal service and so on. So we can get service of letters and so on. I think above all, the key bit at the moment is actually to start building that story. Don't sit back and fester and think I can't do anything. Get on it, identify those accounts that are delinquent, and start getting the communications going backwards and forwards to build that story that it's a pre-COVID-19 problem. And if we can do that, then once you do get into that process of court process, if a delay's in there and so on, at least you have got your house in order and built the story such that the courts can see, hold on, this was a pre-existing problem. And if you do that, you've got a better chance of getting ahead of the game and getting ahead of the other potential creditors. And the old adage of he who jumps highest and shouts loudest will get paid first, that invariably is true.
And last one for now, for a second, for you. I have a long-standing client debt that's on a payment plan. I suspect the business isn't going to make it. How can I secure my debt?
Okay, and so this one depends a bit on the specific circumstances. So, size of the debt as to what you do, and whether there's actually default on the payment plan or not. If there's no default, then there's nothing still to stop you approaching that debtor and asking them for security to support the payment plan. The current circumstances, as if you don't ask, you don't get. If there is default, then a couple of routes really. One, move quickly, go issue court claim, get judgment order, get a charging order behind that as security. Alternatively, I'm echoing a bit here. Alternatively, you can go down the road of a winding up petition. Whilst I've said there's a moratorium, as I say, it's not to say you can't do that. It's a case of ramping up that pressure, and that pressure might give rise to the offer of some voluntary security or indeed payment. So they're the two routes really to go and get your debt secured. Obviously, the other alternative, rather than physical security over a fee or so on, is, don't forget, there's also personal guarantees or cross-company guarantees that might be an option as well, which gives some further comfort and security to members.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to you in a moment. Paul Woolley, got one here for you. It's a sort of general question, really. You there, Paul? Oh, you are. I saw you somewhere.
I'm there.
You're there. Good. Okay. Our business is coping just now, and whilst we've seen a significant fall in revenue, we've been able to continue to trade. We have, however, seen a fall off in staff attention, work rate and commitment. The business really isn't responding particularly well to home working. How can I maintain the culture and work ethic at this time? And that's kind of a question that could go to you, and I guess it could also go to Reality HR. Just wanted to get your view, if I may.
Thank you, Stephen. As consistent, whenever we have these question sessions, you always like to give me one that's not in the order of the question. So
indeed, and I just realised I've just screwed up. I meant to go to the reality. So I'll get Reality HR to answer that one. I'll come back to your question in a moment, Paul. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm quite happy to do that. And if I can start, I'm sure the guys at Reality will chip in. I think I would refer everybody to the excellent session that was done for us, Stephen, a couple of weeks ago by Michelle Morgan, actually on this 11 o'clock call, where she talked about mental well-being and the impacts of home working, etc., etc. And that was reinforced again for people on this call last week by Kerry Evans, where he talked about motivation and how that worked through. So I think there's a lot of stuff about managing virtual teams that certainly are challenges to all of us. And actually, again, as Stephen knows, Michelle and I have written a paper that's in the final stages of linking in agency leadership with mental well-being, and that's something, Stephen, we're hoping to finish out this week. So I think that's my introduction, and I'm sure the guys from Liberty would finish that off with more detail.
Thank you very much. So can I put that question also to Reality HR, if I may?
Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Paul. Some good points there. I'd add probably some practical ideas. So if we think about why people might not be feeling quite so committed or engaged at the moment, one of the reasons is people may be worried about the business. They may be worried about their future employment and what that might look like. So my first suggestion would be really high levels of communication from the leadership team. Make sure that all your staff, although you can't be with them, they know what's happening with the business and what the future looks like, just as they would do if they were sat next to you in the office. So yeah, certainly leadership communication, but also team communication as well. And just as an example, our team at Reality HR, we've really taken on board the Microsoft Teams we use. So we have a daily call, the whole company, all 17 of us. Every morning at 9:30, we have a quick catch up to plan our days and see how everyone is. And then we use the chat functions throughout the day to check in with each other and ask for support. And we're actually finding we're much more collaborative and better at communicating than we were before this started. So make sure you're using all of those tools and everybody's staying in touch. And we have to accept that working from home is a very different environment for most people. And although we are 5-6 weeks in, I've lost count, some people have found it really difficult to find that new normal, especially if they've got other commitments at home, such as children running around, if they're not at school. So we have to be thinking about the impact on that, about how we would normally work. And making some adjustments and managing our expectations. So make sure you're having conversations with your team members about what is possible for them in terms of the hours. And it may not be they can do their normal 9 to 5. They may need to work in the evenings or across weekends. And what's realistic in terms of what they can deliver. And if you focus on what you need them to deliver and what the results look like rather than the number of hours they put in, then you're likely to get much better results for the business. It doesn't have to be about the number of hours they put in. So just having those discussions with them, agreeing what's possible, making sure that's appropriate for the business and you are getting from them what you need, but being managing your expectations and adjusting things wherever possible so it works for them as well. And I think the big issue is around trust. You trusted them to do their work while they were in the office. Why not trust them at home as well? You know that they're good employees. If they were good before and they've suddenly had a performance issue, then it's likely down to these circumstances. Hopefully that will be temporary and you can bring that into consideration when you're thinking about how to manage this. I would say, having said all of that, if you know that you have a poor performer in your team, perhaps they were performing badly beforehand, or it's now a level of performance that you just can't sustain as a business, everything I've said isn't a suggestion that you don't tackle poor performance if you know that it's there and it's genuine. So do engage your normal processes for managing poor performance if you need to, but just bear in mind the mitigating circumstances that we're all facing at the moment.
Sound advice there. Thank you very much indeed. So Paul, I'm going to come back to you and actually ask the question I was originally supposed to ask of you, which is I've cut my overheads to the bone with no idea as to how much business is likely to come through the doors between now and say Q3 and Q4. I'm giving consideration to remortgaging my home to pump more cash into the business. We don't qualify for any of the current government schemes and the bank aren't interested in extending our current loan. What would your advice be?
Thanks, Stephen. I think the first thing I would do is make reference to the first question that was asked today and answered by Julian in terms of the government's initiative on the micro business loan, which I guess was certainly not around when the question was asked. I'm chair of a business in Switzerland, and the micro business loan, as most people are aware, comes on the back of schemes that have been introduced in Switzerland and Germany. And interestingly, there was some skepticism raised as to whether the process will work the way that they do. Both of the businesses that I'm involved with applied for those micro business loans at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the money was indeed in their bank by the end of the day. And I believe that they are cutting and pasting that scheme almost identical from my conversations with Peter Ibbotson from JournoLink that was on this meeting a couple of weeks ago and said that he thought that they were going to push on that. So my first piece of advice would be to look to that micro business loan. I think the second thing I would be very careful about is remortgaging your home. I think obviously anybody that's on this call as an advisor would issue caution on that, not least of all the prospects of getting the money back. And of course, if you can't see the possibility of getting that money back, then I would certainly raise questions as to why you should even think about doing that. I think the third thing I would say as well is that whilst they have turned down your current loan at the moment, I've actually been involved with 14 CBILS loans. 11 have been approved and 3 have been turned down, including one that we got approved yesterday for a 7-figure sum for the largest supplier of cakes to Marks and Spencer's. Now, what was interesting is somebody's actually touched on it earlier. In fact, Nick talked about it, about in respect of debt, about just building a case that everything that's happened is down to CBILS, and basically your business is a sound business. And what I've done is put together a series of things that I've learned through going through these 14 applications with all 4 of the major banks. And the story that I would say to members is they're looking for a reason to help you, but they're not prepared just to throw money at you if there's no prospect of getting that money back. There's been quite a lot of, in my opinion, nonsense talked about that people are going to take the money and then pre-pack their businesses later. The banks are very, very alive to that, very alive. And certainly the 3 that were turned down, to be perfectly honest, were not sustainable businesses going into C-19 crisis. And they're being encouraged by the British banks or the BAA to apply a test. I'm actually going to quote to you exactly what it is: an undertaking in difficulty eligibility criteria. And as a director, statutory director of the business, you'll be asked to sign that you believe the business was not in difficulty going into the C-19 crisis. And they've taken that, guess where from? They've taken that from Switzerland and Germany, who've been applying that right from the start. And that's only been introduced in the last week. And certainly the one that we did yesterday, that had to be signed by all of the directors, it had to be signed by the shareholders, and they're looking for everybody to take reasonable steps on CBILS. So, for example, you'd be surprised how many poor applications go in, where the cash flow, the opening balance doesn't match that was in the bank at the end of March. That doesn't give the bank much confidence in terms of their ability to loan you monies. And actually just think about, again, Nick made reference to us, not only about building a story, about the affordability. It's one thing about taking the cash, it's another thing about considering paying it back again. And that's something as well the banks are alive to. They are looking at what the existing commitments of the business were, what they're likely to be in the future, and your ability to actually grow the business coming out of this. So I think, Stephen, that probably answers that 3 different ways, and also touches on the CBILS loan thing. I think where I would say on CBILS loans, I was encouraged by Stephen and this group a couple of weeks ago to actually pull together anything I've learned from it. And if members actually want my learnings from it, drop me an email, and I'll drop you back what I've learned from it to date.
Thank you. I think that'd be really helpful. Particularly, it'd be interesting to see the criteria for the new micro loans to see whether they're similar. I suspect they're a little bit, the amount involved is smaller. They won't be quite as tough. And it's also good to hear about your M&S example. Proof, I guess, that you can have your cake and eat it.
Exactly.
Moving rapidly on from that really poor joke, I want to talk a little bit about sort of the M&A world. And I've got a few questions here, both David and also Barry. Start with one for David. Here's a business that was due to complete an acquisition last week, but the seller is stalling. We've now had to rethink the deal. How typical is this of the situation? One for you, David.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Oh dear. Sorry about this. Is that, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's much better. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
That's perfect. Okay. We did test the sound beforehand. I don't know what happens. Anyway, good morning, everybody. Clearly, we are in an exceptional circumstances at the moment with deals, and it is not unusual for some deals to fall over or get stalled in some way. I think the most important thing is with buyer and between buyer and seller is to keep the relationship and be open and honest with each other. I mean, for example, we've got 4 deals at the moment, and one was completed literally a short time before the lockdown. Both parties knew what they were getting into. They were both in a good position, and they both are very pleased they did the deal because they've been able to pursue their strategy and work together and refer clients to each other. So it's been a very successful situation. I've got 2 others, and the thing to remember, it's not only the seller that can get into a little bit of trouble, it's often the buyers that have a little bit of trouble. And these other two deals are where the buyer has probably been more affected than the seller, and they've had to raise finance for these businesses, and they're just a little bit nervous about completing during this lockdown period. But I think all parties are really committed to the deal and want to go ahead afterwards. So we should see a bit of a rebound straight afterwards. And the final deal I've got on is more of a tech deal where both sides aren't affected, and hopefully that one will go through. So I think the lesson really is to keep the relationship, and if you can work together and get to know each other better during this exceptional period, then that's good.
Thank you very much, David. Barry, one for you. Have you seen an increase in potential acquisitions and mergers as a consequence of COVID?
Have you seen an increase?
Mr. Dudley. You're on mute, dear boy. Let me unmute you. I think we're both pushing it at the same time. There you are. Barry.
Ian. Great stuff. I don't think we've seen an increase. We've seen, as David's explained, conversations that were running along in a certain direction change directions, hold, pause, or continue. But I don't think we've seen more at the moment. I think there's a lot of conversations are going to be going on, but I don't think we're seeing more.
Do you see that the landscape post-COVID is going to be very different to the one pre-COVID? And if so, how?
I think it is going to be different. If we start with the traditional big group buyers, they've been doing less and less anyway, and they're seeking to reinvent themselves. So to David's point, it's not always just the targets that having to twist and turn. The acquirers themselves are doing the same, and certainly the big groups are. But there's a couple of buts with them. You'll hear stories of networks laying off a lot of people. They'll be divesting of agencies, sections of their businesses, I'm sure, but they'll also be looking for targets, specialists probably, not generalists, to build on where they're reinventing themselves too. So I think they're still going to be in the market. And that sort of brings me to the second but, which is Tony, one of our business partners who's on with us today. He video conferenced with the head of M&A at one of the big groups on Monday. They're categorically on the front foot, to use their words, totally bullish on the acquisition front. They've worked out what their strategy is. They're enacting it, so you'll hear some bad news as well as good news. They know what they're getting up to. Some others I'm not sure do. The consultancies, I think they'd also slowed pre-COVID. And in reality, Accenture was the biggest one, or biggest player in that mix. But you could see one of them make a massive move on one of the big groups. Whilst the share prices are through the floor, who knows? The mini groups were becoming more active. So Q, Stagwell, Project Worldwide, they don't have the same levels of legacy challenges and are sort of forming a group that's more relevant to now versus reversing it towards now. They might hit the ground running when we come out the other side. There's then a huge spectrum of other buyers, systems integrators, print management groups, talent agencies, media owners. The spectrum just gets bigger. It's kind of exciting for us, but it's not without its challenges, as that's such a diverse gang who do things in various ways. Mm. But probably the most active area of all will revolve around PE and VC. as their model is predicated on having to spend their funds. They've got to keep doing those things. And they do that in three ways: acquiring new platforms and then back those platforms' growth. The second bit, part of that growth is often buying more things. So Dept, backed by Carlisle, Brain Labs by Living Bridge, are two examples. They're the platforms. They are looking to buy things. They will be out on the hunt. They are out on the hunt. We've got conversations. And thirdly, there's backing roll-ups. And this is sort of a subset of the platform, but it's where a few things need to be rolled together to create the critical mass for a platform. So there's going to be a lot happening in that particular space, I think. But that leads me to the last area of activity where I think there will be a lot happening as well, is the smaller independent groups, small businesses, acquiring or merging or forming alliances with their peers, complementary businesses, perhaps even their competitors, which I think I've mentioned on this forum before. And we're seeing plenty happening in that kind of space. And one of the amazing things coming out of these challenging times is how people have pulled together. And obviously Pimento itself is testament to this. People talk and things are going to be happening because of that. So yeah, I think that's another area that's going to thrive. There's a lot going on. So I know there's a hell of a lot of challenges that people are facing. But in amongst all of that, there's a lot happening and a lot of people looking around. When it actually kicks in a bigger way is likely to be September forwards, but there's a lot happening and agitating in the background at the moment.
Okay. I mean, my question for both of you, which is that these things take a while to happen. They just don't happen quickly. And if agencies are in a difficult financial situation at the moment, should they not be really actively seeking opportunities to find partnerships and find ways in which they can either be acquired or partner with another organisation, rather than wait till it gets to a point where the valuation of their businesses becomes such that, or they become insolvent? I mean, are you seeing that situation at the moment? Are you seeing people approach you, David?
Yes, I mean, for us, the sad thing about it very often in recessions and situations like this is we actually find out too late. If there's agencies in trouble, there's always, and perhaps it's because they're run by entrepreneurs, but when there's agencies in trouble, they tend to leave things too late. They tend to always believe they'll get out of it. There'll be a new client win or something like that will get them out of it. And very often, that may not happen. And, I would certainly ask anybody to come and have a chat, because that the process does take a little while. But even if a business is in difficulty, very often there are buyers out there that would be interested in that buyer. I mean, in that company, we've got a client at the moment, and that's sort of bumping along the break-even level. But we've got two overseas buyers, one in Asia, one in Europe, that are very interested because they need a platform in London, and they have clients, international clients, that will give them more business if they have a platform in London. There are other businesses locally that would be interested in capitalising on the synergies, the cost savings, and also having some really top quality staff join their force. So I think the big take on it is start talking to people like us as early as possible. Even if in the end you don't act on it, it's worth having that conversation, because these things do take a time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a clear message there. Russell, I'm going to turn our attention to the world of freelancing and recruitment. Russell White, are you there, sir? Or just need to unmute yourself. Oh, there you go.
I'm here.
Yeah, great. Well, one for you, sir. I mean, the world of recruitment must be an interesting place at the moment, shall we say?
Yes.
But it's not dead completely. So I'd be interested to know what sort of briefs are you getting, and equally too, are you seeing, obviously, with agencies currently perhaps making people redundant, are you seeing an increase in the number of inbound inquiries for positions relative to obviously the jobs that are available at the moment?
What I'm finding, and most of the calls that I'm fielding at the moment are from people who are either interims or have been on long-term contracts, who are not eligible for whatever reason for furloughing and are being let go effectively. And so consequently, they will be looking for freelance opportunities and interim opportunities as we come out of as we come out of the crisis. Equally, what I'm also hearing from people are predominantly mid to senior management, unfortunately, where they're currently on furlough and they have already been told that when furlough ends, assuming it ends on June the 30th, they will no longer have a job. So clearly, a lot of companies are very concerned about their cash flow and revenues moving forward and are divesting themselves of staff. Equally, but on a more positive note, what I'm hearing is that there is an expectation, particularly among certain agencies that work with certain clients in certain sectors, either government, tech, health. Funny enough, someone this morning talked to me about the second-hand car market. Any agency that works in with clients in those areas are going to have requirements, because these businesses are going to, I think that they acknowledge, or particularly the government, lots of information and indeed marketing is going to be required to sort of effectively take advantage of the situation. And whereas, you know, perhaps certain agencies where they may not have the resource, where they will come on, they will be looking for freelance people on a project basis. And equally on the client side as well, we think that, you know, as companies begin to emerge, they will take on, they won't necessarily rehire people on a permanent basis, but they may take on people on an interim and contract basis. And, you know, and from our perspective, yeah, at Premier, we're beginning to pivot more in that general direction, certainly in the short to medium term, as we see as we see companies begin to emerge. I'm getting mixed messages. I mean, some people are very negative, but again, you know, some people still firmly believe that we are going to have this V-shaped recovery, because there's a lot of pent-up demand. People aren't paying necessarily, they're not going out, they've got money in the bank, they'll want to spend, they'll want to go into garden centres, there'll be pent-up demand in the marketplace, they may well book their holidays, and there is this feeling amongst some that there will be this V-shaped recovery in terms of the economy overall.
Thank you. I mean, I totally concur with your point about the fact the trend towards, obviously, for the freelance community, and we're seeing that obviously prior to COVID already. I mean, a number of agencies in London are running sort of 40% of their staff are actually freelancers. Obviously, the counterpoint of view on that is IR35, but as I understand it, that's been kicked down the road another 12 months. That's correct, yeah, for 12 months. I have a sneaking suspicion that they may well scrap IR35 moving forward, simply because of the fact that there will be so many more, there will be a lot of unemployed people, and the way back for those people back into the workplace or back into the job market is through freelance and interim. So I suspect, you know, if I was a betting man, I'd probably put money on the fact that that will be scrapped altogether, or at least you know, stop for at least another 12 months afterwards. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for that. Another question, if I may, for you. Actually, no, that can you actually cover that actually just now, if I may. One for, I guess, a combination of both Redfin and our friends at Reality HR. And you sort of touched on this earlier on, which is post the initial crisis, we've decided to extend home working, and we believe it to be a good solution for both the business and the staff. Are there any cost or tax implications for third parties if we continue with that methodology? I'm thinking about staff claiming some of their costs for running their home, for example, you know, energy and so on, and the impact on council tax, business rates, insurance, etc., etc. So a number of questions within that one, some obviously pertaining to tax and implications in terms of that. The others obviously pertaining to actually having more staff work permanently from home. How do you cover off some of the costs that they're incurring? So if I direct that one initially, if I may, at Julian at Redfin.
Yep. The tax implications, if you're working sort of permanently from home, you can claim £6 a week, grand sum of that, for doing that. And only sort of claim more than that for tax purposes if you've got evidence that you've actually incurred a greater cost. So things like home telephone costs and your energy costs. If you can demonstrate that since you've been working from home, your costs have gone up 50%, say, you can then claim the tax refund the 50%. So claim from the company effectively the 50% extra cost, but only if you've got evidence of that. In terms of rates, I don't think it affects your sort of council tax, but you can, if you're working from home, permanently claim that a portion of your home is rateable for business rates. Now that means you can claim back the cost of the business rates against the company, but there's a downside to doing that, in that part of your company then is sort of treated, so as part of your house is then treated as a business, and that can have capital gains tax implications when you come to sell it, because part of your property then may not be eligible for the private residence relief. So we'd tend to recommend not doing that. So the only real benefits are the £6 a week, or any additional costs you incur that you can evidence.
Okay, and if you were to pay, for example, your employees an energy allowance, presumably that's a taxable benefit.
Yeah, anything like that is, yeah.
Okay, so we have time for just two more questions. Similar question back to Reality HR. If one is considering moving, if experience has been positive by having people working from home, and you decide as an organisation that you want to move to a flexible or indeed permanent solution where people work from home, what are the implications in terms of staff contracts, ways of working, sort of the legals around that? And that's for Reality HR.
I think Catherine's talking, but she's got a microphone on.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me?
We can.
I think what we work with a lot of clients and put in place home working policies for them, just to be very clear to the employee about what is expected, what they can claim for, the tax implications, how we expect them to work from home. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So a very clear home working policy for employees that outlines the health and safety expectations, simple things around doing audits of their environment to make sure that it's a safe environment. If there's going to be children at home, are there any trip hazards from cables? Have they got a safe and secure environment in which to work? What sort of equipment can they claim for? So if they need a printer at home, do they take home laptops or monitors from the office, or can they buy extra for at home? All of those sorts of things. I think it's for the employer to work with their team to decide what they actually want the employees to have and what they are comfortable to provide. But it's just about making sure that that's all clear and it's in a policy that employees can read, that they can understand what the rules and regulations are around the home working policy. A number of clients, if they've got small teams, quite often go out and audit the home environment so that they can see the environment that the person's going to be working in. Have they got sufficient broadband, etc.? So I think we're going to see a lot more of this, and we've all been thrown into it, and most people seem to be sort of coping okay, but IT providers are finding that they're getting a lot more calls for people that can't connect at home, that wouldn't have actually realised that before, that wasn't perhaps quite as easy as they anticipated. Things like stationery, if they're going to be working all the time from home, do they buy their own stationery? Do they get it from the office? Does the employer provide it? Do they claim back? Do they claim it on expenses? There's lots of practical implications that are going to need to be considered And the start point, we always feel, is put it in a home working policy, have those conversations, put it in a policy so that everybody's clear. And then you can deal with things as they come up and amend and add to that. And then everybody is understanding from the start, really. So those are the important things that we look at.
Catherine, I suspect a number of us will want to come back to you to talk about home working policies and get you on something like that. Last question of the day. First of all, a reminder, we have 13 events over the next 8 days. We will share the event list after the end of this call. But perhaps the most important question of the day came from one of our illustrious friends, a member who's on the call at the moment. I'm not going to tell you who it was, but I'm sure you can work it out. Which is, what will Boris Johnson and Kerry Symonds call their newborn son? Chris after Chris Whitty, Patrick after Patrick Vallance, Dominic after Dominic Cummings, God forbid, or Tom after Captain Tom Moore. So I'll leave you with that thought. Any answers, please do actually pen me your own suggestion. I'm going for Tom. But thank you very much to everybody for giving your time this morning. A good number of attendees. I think I had 63 at the height. Some really good answers to some pretty difficult questions. And I'll be sharing out with the wider group as a whole. So have a great day, and look forward to seeing you on our calls over the next few days. Thank you very much indeed once again to our panel.